What if Martin Luther King Jr. was alive today? This is a big question and it has a lot of implications. There are many avenues we could go down in terms of discussions because although Dr. King is most famous for his fight for racial equality, he was leading many other fights as well. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an American Baptist minister, an activist who became the most visible voice, spokesman, and leader in the American Civil Rights Movement from 1955 until he was assassinated in 1968. Dr. King helped to advance people's rights to vote, desegregation, labor rights, and basically he fought for a multitude of basic civil rights. He was inspired by his Christian faith to pursue these avenues through nonviolent activism and civil disobedience. He led protests and marches and made speeches, many of which have gone down in history as some of the most famous speeches ever given. During Dr. King's life, he was well known. He received a Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for combating racial inequality through nonviolent resistance, and it seems as though he was a highly regarded person, but that is not quite true. Dr. King was very much disliked during his time on Earth because he threatened the way things were. He saw issues he wanted to fix, and he was vocal about them. He didn't want to stop until he left the world better than he had found it. He had a voice that held weight and importance with the people. He was feared. It wasn't until after his death where he became an icon, where he became highly revered by the masses. It wasn't until after his death where the vast majority of people really started listening. Funny how that works. It is entirely possible that had Dr. King not had his life cut tragically short, there would be no Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we wouldn't still be quoting his "I have a dream" speech, and he wouldn't be regarded as one of the most important figures in American history. I say that this is possible, not that this would be the case, because of course we don't live in a world where his assassination never happened, so how could we possibly know for sure? But his assassination is what led to him being known as this sort of martyr for the civil rights movement. I mean, take in, right before his passing, he was extremely vocal about his strong critique of the Vietnam War. In his famous speech against it, he said that the United States had lied about their reasons they gave for the war and claimed that the United States betrayed Vietnam. He was also against the war because he stated that the war was shifting money that could be used in domestic aid programs to help those in need rather than using it to support violence. Despite all of the threats that Dr. King faced on his life and the loss of many of his close friends, he never gave up and he devoted himself to his cause. He was not afraid to challenge the United States and the power of the country. He called the United States, quote, "the greatest purveyor of violence on earth." It is not easy to stand up, especially so vocally, to the United States. This all goes hand in hand with how Dr. King was not necessarily looked on favorably during his life. Of course not by everyone. There were people with him every step of the way who saw his vision, saw his dream, saw a better world for all, and gave Dr. King their love and support. I'm just talking about the general masses when we talk about the people who disliked Dr. King during his life. If Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was still alive today, that means that he would have been able to enjoy 30 more years with his wife, Coretta Scott King, who passed away in 2006. Before Dr. King's passing, there were many rumors and accusations of his infidelity in their marriage. If he was still alive today, at some point he would have either acknowledged the truth in those rumors and accusations, or he would have been able to definitively and distinctly state that they were untrue. Not that this is any of our business regardless, but people will pry when you're in the public eye, especially when you're trying to shift the status quo. Perhaps in a world where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is still alive, he was still shot on that fateful, terrible day of October 4th, 1968, but managed to survive. Although the day he died was not the first time someone had tried to assassinate him, maybe even if he had survived, he still would have gone on to be the household name that he is in this world. If that's the case, then maybe he would have been around to see his 9-year-old granddaughter, Yolanda Renee King, give her presentation in Washington, D.C. in 2018 at the March for Our Lives rally. The rally was a protest against gun violence, and it was organized by students after the senseless display of gun violence that took place at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Dr. King would have been immensely proud of all of the students there, but it would have been a beautiful day to see him hear his granddaughter speak the words, quote, "I have a dream too. No more gun violence." Considering Dr. King was an extremely non-violent man, I think he would have had similar values and opinions to those that were displayed at that specific rally, but even if he had not, I think it would have filled him with pride and joy to see so many young people standing up and speaking up for what they believe in. After all, Dr. King paved the way so that we could run today. If Dr. King was alive today and was able to see the technological advancements the world has made, I think he would be impressed and very happy. Part of his mission for equality was to make education accessible for all, and while I am very aware that there are many inequalities in the access to education, the world of technology has certainly shrunk the gap in some parts of the world. That is not to say that we don't have leaps and bounds to go. If Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was alive today, looking back on the last 50-odd years, he would see both immense progress, but he would also see regression. Part of this is the natural ebb and flow of things, and part of this is just because some things haven't exactly changed since 1968. He certainly would have taken note of the 8-year presidency of the first black president of the United States. Of course, I am talking about former President Barack Obama. I think he would have been excited about the former president's efforts to reform healthcare, although he would have been quick to point out the flaws that came along with the plan. Dr. King was always striving for better for the people. If Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was still alive today, I think the world would have continued to benefit from his prophetic voice for the last half a century, and I believe his wisdom would have only increased and became more well known. I think if Dr. King was alive today, he would look at civil rights organizations and movements like Black Lives Matter with a positive and proud eye, but I also think he would encourage us all to bridge the gap that so clearly sits between us still. We live in a world right now that is quite focused on identity politics. It can sometimes feel like we haven't come that far, or like things haven't changed from the 1960s. Although there is always still more work for us to do, Dr. King helped propel us forward, and we just have to keep his words in mind. Although these words have been repeated so many times it feels almost like a trope to repeat them, it is not, and they carry just as much weight now as they once did. These are words we need to remember even here in 2021. In his incredibly famous and historic I Have a Dream speech, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said the words, quote, "I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." Usually the quoted part is where he discusses the world he hopes his children will one day live in, but I took a step back a bit because those initial lines really resonate with me personally. As a biracial woman, it is clear to me that there was once a day and time where people like me were basically illegal. In many places, interracial marriage was illegal until 1964. That is during the work of Dr. King. Without his voice and the voice of others like him, this world might be a very, very different one, and I am eternally grateful for his voice, his wisdom, and his bravery. Personal resonations aside, those last lines, the most quoted ones, are extremely important, especially in our current social and civil climate. Quote, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Look inside, do the work, and go out there and treat each other well." Thanks for watching this video today, LBQ fam. Stay curious, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.